Hi, today we would like to talk about platform and app historiography based on a forthcoming book chapter that you can download via this QR code. We engage with the research affordances of web archives for writing platform and app histories, despite the many challenges that these new ephemeral digital objects pose to their archiving and history writing. We will discuss what kind of archive materials are available to us and what kind of platform and app histories these materials afford. We'll start with thinking about the archive materiality of platforms and apps. The main point is that web archives contain more than we think. That is, if we take a slightly different entry point to our object of study and consider the medium specificity or materiality of platforms and apps. We will then introduce a framework for conducting platform and app histories and demonstrate a way to assess the availability of archived platform and app sources. Finally, we'll address what kind of histories these materials privilege and what they enable us to tell us about the evolution of platforms and apps. The early web mainly consisted of interlinked websites, and as a consequence, the website has become the main unit of archiving as well as historical analysis. However, in the past decade, we have witnessed the emergence of new types of digital objects, in particular digital platforms and apps for social media. But what characterizes these specific digital objects as archived objects, as compared to the website or web page? When thinking of how platforms and apps are archived today, we contend that we need to consider their specific materiality. With the term materiality, we refer to the material form of those digital objects, as well as the material circumstances of those objects that leave material traces of their production and use behind. This is derived from Matthew Kirschenbaum's idea for historical software studies, an approach to the study of the history of software objects. Platforms and apps are specific types of internet-enabled software. This software is built, maintained, documented, and these are the material circumstances that leave material traces, including developer documentation, business tools and product pages, help and support pages, in addition to the material form of the software object itself. Importantly, these material circumstances leave material traces are important primary sources that offer particular research opportunities. These material traces may tell stories about the evolving production, preferred usage, and embedded politics of software objects. In this sense, it contributes a kind of platform and app historiography through the lens of software studies. So platforms and apps are new types of digital objects that notoriously resist archiving due to their ephemerality and continuous updates. As a consequence, their histories are being overwritten with each update rather than written and preserved. This raises the question how we can examine their histories. Where and how are platforms and apps archived? We can find social media platforms and web archives, but if we start from their main URL, we can only write histories of their sign-up pages and login pages as seen here for Twitter. But if we look at the links in the bottom of the website, we can go beyond the end-user interface and find snapshots for Twitter's other pages, such as business pages and help pages. So learning from the specificity of platforms, we know that they are multi-sided. That is, they cater to different kinds of stakeholders or users, including end users, developers, businesses, and advertisers. And platforms offer specific resources and documents tailored to these user groups. So in this previous paper, we looked at which type of resources platforms provide to each of these user groups. We can find help pages for end users, API documentation for developers, marketing materials for businesses. And we took inventory of these kind of materials and considered what type of platform histories can be written using these materials. So apps share some of the archival challenges of social media platforms, but they also face their own, as each update overrides the current version and app stores do not keep previous versions of apps. On top of that, while apps may be tightly connected to web platforms, they are not web native objects. This raises the question, how are apps archived, where and by whom? To locate former app versions, the app as a material form, we may turn to several third-party software repositories. Contrary to traditional institutional archives, these repositories are non-institutional storage locations for the retrieval of software, and they were never designed for permanent preservation. While they may share commonalities with web archives or archives, software repositories do not curate collections of records for permanent historical preservation and do not necessarily consider their value as evidence or as a source for historical research. While apps and app stores both exist primarily on mobile devices, the leading app stores, including Google Play and Apple's App Store, have also provided web-based graphical user interfaces to their stores. And these stores contain a wealth of information about specific apps as well as their recommendations. For each app, there is a details page with the app's title, developer name, screenshots, description, app permission, download statistics, reviews, ratings, and more. Unfortunately, for app historians, these app detail pages are preserved in web archives, thereby generating novel research opportunities for app historians. In short, to locate historical app materials, we may either turn to app repositories to retrieve former app versions or to web archives to retrieve app metadata. So we present a method to assess the availability of archived web sources for social media platforms and apps across the leading web archives and app repositories. So we selected the current top 20 most popular social media platforms and top 10 mobile apps worldwide. For the social media platforms, we created a list of URLs pointing to the location of their primary materials for their various user groups or sites. For the mobile apps, we created a list of URLs pointing to the App Store detail pages and to their place in app repositories. To assess which archives actually hold archival records, we employed Memento's time travel service. And to scale and automate this process for looking up large sets of URLs, we used Memgator, an open source command line utility that is built on top of the Memento API and aggregates mementos. So Memgator programmatically requests Memento time maps from a list of web archives that support the Memento protocol, thus enabling us to look up a large list of URLs across multiple web archives. So we gathered all the URLs and analyzed how well a platform or app is archived along 3 dimensions: the volume availability, the depth of availability, and the breadth of availability. So the volume and depth reflect the amount of material that is available and the afforded level of granularity or resolution for the historical analysis. The breadth enables researchers to triangulate historical sources and to reconstruct past states of platform and apps using sources from multiple web archives. So for social media platforms, while most platforms are quite well archived, there are notable differences. In particular, next to the end-user interface, which is often this empty frame, developer and business materials have been well archived and enable researchers to write histories beyond the front-end interface of end-users. So this enables us to look at platforms' influential roles as development platforms, as advertising platforms, content creation platforms, or as media publishers. So while the end user or consumer side of Facebook might not be well archived, its developer side, business and advertiser sides are very well archived. Using the same method, we assessed how well the app detail pages in app stores have been archived. Contrary to social media platforms, apps have been less well archived in general, at least when we look at the preservation of their app store detail pages in web archives. Overall, we found that the Google Play apps were better archived, at least in terms of volume, depth, and breadth of availability. The 4 best archived Android apps are Facebook Messenger, Instagram, Facebook, and WhatsApp Messenger. while other, often Chinese apps such as WeChat, QQ, Alipay, Taobao, Baidu are hardly archived. So even with tens or hundreds of archived web pages, as in the case with WeChat, we can hopefully still write their histories. The archived app materials enable researchers to examine the evolution of individual apps or collection or genres of apps. For example, we may examine the emergence of secure messaging apps and how they offer new and different ways of doing privacy by reading the app's changing descriptions to examine the app's rhetorical positioning. When we looked at the preservation of apps in software repositories, we found more promising results. All of the top 10 apps in our set are relatively well archived based on our criteria. With access to the app as an archived material object, we can examine the app's evolving interface design and read the source code to study evolving app permissions, embedded code, and external relationships to other infrastructural services such as advertising networks and content delivery networks. So we argue that while platforms and apps continuously update and change the routine overriding of digital objects and their data through incremental software updates, this constitutes on the one hand a core problem, as well as a source of research opportunities for platform and app historians, at least as long as these changes are documented by these digital objects themselves or preserved by web archives. So the ephemerality of digital platforms and mobile apps may be understood as the result of a continuous stream of incremental software updates that override the material presence of a platform or app every single time. And we understand these contextual materials as important primary sources through which digital objects such as platforms and apps write or indeed overwrite their own biographies, thereby building on the emerging genre of media biography, including software biography, website biography, and platform biography. And we may conceive of this process of overriding as a challenge of material erasure, or as a native mode of software history writing. That is, even though these ephemeral digital objects change continuously, web archives and software repositories fortunately capture many of those changes, thereby arresting the ongoing material transformation of platforms and apps at certain interval times. Consequently, we argue that the biographies of platforms and apps are co-written by these digital objects themselves and by web archives, and in the case of apps, also by software repositories. And we can employ their different types of primary and contextual sources to reconstruct these processes of overwriting at different levels of granularity, from the minute incremental changes to the longer-term evolution of a platform or app. And we can use web archives and software repositories to reconstruct what was written on top of other writing and to narrate the drama of changes, updates, and versions. Thank you.